Good for this afternoon, the Rebbe Zulkazunzen began the Farbrengen that in addition that it is Shabbos Mavoch in Kislev, it is also Shabbos Pashas Chayei Sarah. In the Seder we read about Chayei Sarah, that Sarah lived for 127 years. And the way it is spelled out in the Pasuk uses the expression Meya Shana, Ve'esrim Shana, Ve'sheva Shana. She lived for Meya Shanim, Sheva Shanim, and for 7 years. And the Chassidus stresses what is the inyan of Meya, Esrim, and Sheva. So it's brought out in Chassidus that the number of Meya relates to Sviras HaKesar. Esrim relates to Moichin, and Sheva relates to Midas, as we know that there are Midas of a person, Midas are divided into 7. And the Mela, when we're talking here about the life of Sarah, that it was 127 years, it's really something very general, bringing out that it's a combination of all general inyanim, beginning from Keser, including Rotzen v'Tainuk, and Moichen, which is in Esrem, and then it comes down into Sheva, which that is Midas. And here the Rebbe explained that in general we find many inyanim that are divided in a way that there is a klal, and the klal, later, from the klal, pratim, individual points are developed. First and foremost, we find out how the Rebbe created the world. The Rebbe created the world. Adam nivra yechidi. Man was created alone. And then later, as a result of that, the outcome of it was that there are many, many pratim. And the same we find in the entire Seder Hishtalshelus. The Seder Hishtalshelus begins with Achtus Pshuta from the Rabbeinu Shleilam, and then it comes from this one klal that it relates into many, many pratim, until the pratim of the details of all the Asas Sviras. So again, the Rebbe is bringing out how we find it in many major inyanim, how the major inyanim begin with a klal, and the klal, something general, a general point, and then later the klal is divided into many pratim. And the same we find in the person's daily life as well. We find it in the person's daily life. He starts off his day with davening. There's the general klal in tefillah, what tefillah is, that a person confronts the Rabbeinu Shleilam. And then in tefillah itself, there are the various details of tefillah. From tefillah, a person is supposed to go mebeis haknesses lebeis hamedrash, meaning from tefillah he goes to Torah. And in Torah we also have the same. Torah begins with birchas haTorah. We cannot learn Torah unless we said birchas haTorah. As a famous Gemara, the Gemara says, that one of the reasons the Beis Hamikdash was destroyed, the Gemara gives the reason Shalei berchu b'Torah tchila, that the Yidden learned Torah and they did not say birchas haTorah prior to the learning of Torah. So many occasions that the Rebbe referred to it, today referred to it as well. What's the pshat? That because of the Yidden did not say birchas haTorah, is then this a reason that it should lead to the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash? But what is the inyan of birchas haTorah? Birchas haTorah we say Baruch Atah Hashem Neisna haTorah. So where do we stress that Torah is something which comes from the Rebishter, and Torah is the Chachma and wisdom of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that we bring out in birchas haTorah. The Mela, when a Yid learns Torah, and in the learning of Torah he's lacking this recognition, this realization that Torah comes from the Rabbeinu Shleilam, that's the pshat Shalei Baruchu b'Torah tchila. Yidden learned Torah, however they did not react to it, that what are they learning? They are learning Chachmas Hashem. So again, what is the whole meaning of Torah? Torah has a shaykhs to the Rabbeinu Shleilam. So that is the general klal in Torah. And from this klal, we come into pratim of simply learning all the various details, all the pratim which we learn in Torah, until Torah leads to mindset, so that we should know what to do. Limud hamevi lidei mindset. If we learn halachas and we learn how we are to act, so then maybe we know what to do. So this is the general seder. The Yid also goes in such a way, and from Torah we come into hanig bahem minig darech eretz, which means that after learning Torah, Yid goes out into his daily schedule of being involved in worldly inyanim. So hanig bahem minig darech eretz also has, first of all, there's the Yonim of Birchas Hanenin, that we have to recite brachas on a Yonim which will come across Gashmistik and Yonim, eating, drinking, and so forth, until all the pratim of the details, how we have to instill Avedis Hashem into our day-to-day life. And the same thing is the general union of Yeridas HaNeshama is also an union of Yerida Gdoila. It's a tremendous Yerida. It's a Yerida Me'ikra Rama Labeira Amikta, from a very high mountain into a very deep ditch. And also, this Yerida, there's the general concept of the Yerida, the cloud, and then the pratim, all the levels of Yerida which the Neshama goes through until it comes down into this world, and then the Aliyah, the achievement which can be accomplished once the Neshama is here in this world. Once we are talking about the beginning of the Sedra, which is the union of Chayei Sarah, which we just explained, the klolim of Kesef, Moichen and Midas, it's customary also to explain a Rashi in the beginning of the Sedra. What does Rashi say at the beginning of the Sedra? Shnei Chayei Sarah, Rashi comments, Kulon Shavan L'Toiva. Comes to tell us that all the years of Sarah are equal to the good. And that is why Pasuk says, Vayu Chayei Sarah. So the Pasuk says, Meya Shana, Ve'esrim Shana, Ve'sheva Shana. The word Shana is repeated each time, when it's mentioned in the hundredth, when it's mentioned in tens, and when it's mentioned in singular. So Rashi explains why is this. It comes to tell us that when she was a Bas Kuf, when Sarah was 100, she was equivalent to 20 Lechet. Just like when she was age of 20, she did not have sins, the same at the age of 100. And ma bas kuf ke bas chof lechet. Ma bas chof loichot sharena bas oinsin, af bas kuf, the same. And also, bas chof ke bas zayin liyoifi. Just like when she was 7-year-old, she was nice, the special beauty that she had. So the same thing, when she was at age of 20, she also had that. Then the pasuk concludes, Shnei Chayei Sarah. Pasuk repeats again, this is all the years of Sarah. So Rashi explains, Kulon Shavan L'Toiva, to tell us that all her years were equally good. But it says, interesting, we find in this week's Sedra the same thing, an expression by two other people where the Torah mentions a number of years that they lived, and also with the word Shana repeated, Sai after the 100, Sai after the 20s, Sai after the 10s, and Sai after the singular, and Rashi does not comment on it. We find this in this week's Sedra both times, Sai by Avraham and Sai by Yishmael. The Torah tells us that Avraham lived 175 years, so also the Torah uses the expression Meya Shana, Shivim Shanim, V'chamesh Shanim. And the same we find by the life of Yishmael. The Torah tells us that Yishmael, at the very end of the Sedra, one pasuk before the last, the Torah tells us that Yishmael lived 137 years. So again the expression, Ma'as Shana, Shloishim Shana, V'sheva Shanim. So obviously the pasuk could have included it all into one. Meya, Shloishim, V'sheva Shanim. Why is the Shanim mentioned extra each time? And the same by Abraham. So we may want to learn Pshat, that with the same Perush that Rashi tells us here by Sarah can apply also by Avraham and also by Yishmael. So let us try and we'll see it doesn't work out. To say the fact that Kulon Shavan L'Toiva, all the years were equally the same, by Yishmael we cannot say that. If we look into the life of Yishmael, we know there were the years that he was in Avraham Avinu's house, the years that he was under Avraham Avinu's guidance, and then later when he left Avraham's house, and what turned out of Yishmael then? Weiter by Avraham Avinu, where it is mentioned that Avraham lived for 175 years. What can we compare between the 70 and the 5? For example, what is there to compare between 70 and 5? The fact that when Avraham Avinu realized the existence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that was neither at the age of 70, neither at the age of 5, that was at the age of 3. There are other opinions in Chazal, but none of the opinions claim that it was neither at 5, neither at 70. So how can we draw a parallel between 70, 5, and 100 in the age of Avraham? Neither could we do it in the age of Avraham, and neither could we do it in the age of Yishmael. And nonetheless, the Torah by both of them, in this week's Sedra, in the same Sedra, repeats the word Shana 3 times. By each one of them, say when the Torah tells us how long Avram lived, and say when the Torah tells us how long Ishmael lived. And Rashi bypasses this pasuk and does not tell us anything. And Rashi's inyan is, wherever there is something which is not understood in Pshuta Shel Mikra, Rashi has to comment and learn and tell us the Pshat in it. Especially when at the beginning of the Sedra, Rashi already alerted us to such a question when the Torah tells us how long Sarah lived. And nonetheless, when it comes to Avram and when it comes to Yishmael, we pass the pasuk and Rashi does not say anything. Which is a question which the Rebbe left unanswered in the Farbrengen. Then the Rebbe continued that this is the Shabbos with the convention of Shluchim. When Shluchim from all over the world are here, and everything is Bahashgacha Pratis, this week's Sedra is the first time we find in the Torah such a detailed report on an inyan of Shlichus. The whole inyan of Eliezer Eved Avram, how Eliezer was appointed by Avram to fulfill a Shlichus for him. Eliezer was a Shliach for Avram. And at the same time, how Eliezer went and he did it, and he fulfilled this mission, and he even made up that, it went to such an extent that he even made up with Avraham Avinu what will be in the event he will not be successful in the Shlichus. So we see how the Torah tells us all the details, to the fullest, to the T, everything is related regarding the Shlichus of Avraham Avinu. Of Avraham Avinu when he sent Eliezer to find the Shidduch for Yitzchak. Even though we find in the Torah, weiter, in Chumash, another union of Shlichus, and that is when the Yidden made an arrangement with the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven, that the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven joined the Yidden, that they will go along with the Yidden and have a battle and help them to conquer the other side of the Yarden. And on this condition they made up that they will remain, that their Chelik in Eretz Yisrael will be Eiver HaYarden. So there it's also a kind of a Shlichus arrangement, to the extent that many halachas in Torah we derive, many halachas as far as Tnai, as far as condition, we learn up from the whole procedure, what went on with the Bnei Gad and the Bnei Reuven, to such an extent that in Poskim it is brought, the Rebbe says, that from here we see how people can make an arrangement, people can make a deal amongst themselves, even though there are no witness, and they don't put it into writing. Just that there's a power given between two people, there's authority given that one and another can make an agreement. They can make an agreement on whatever issue they would like to amongst themselves. And these halachas are also derived from the way the Torah tells us how the arrangement with the Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven was made. But at the same time, it does not compare to the fullest detail which we find here by Eliezer and Avram, to such an extent that Eliezer was put under oath before Avram sent him, that he will fulfill the mission properly. How did Avram tell him? Simno yotcha tachas yirechi. At that time, this was the only chayfet, this was the only object of kedusha which Avram had. So he told him, Simno yotcha tachas yirechi, because he fulfilled the mitzvah of Milah, and therefore he put him under oath with this chayfet shel kedusha, and that he will fulfill the mission properly. And the entire details, all the details of shlichus, are in this week's Sedra. Bichlal in the inyan of Shliach, Rebbe continued, we find two inyanim. On one side we say, Shluchai shal Adam kembaisai, which means, if somebody appoints somebody to serve on his behalf as a Shliach, he represents him fully. It is kembaisai mamish. In other words, as if this person would be here. That is on one hand. On the other hand, we say, it is not the person himself. It is not the Mishaleach himself. It is another person, a stranger, and this stranger was given authority. This stranger was given an authority to represent, and he's fully authorized to act on behalf of the one who's his Mishaleach. So, in other words, it's a davar v'hifuchai. It's a concept, and there's a contradictory concept here at the same time. On one side we say, Shluchai shel Adam kemaisai, and on the other side it's extremely obvious that the Shliach is a Metzias in himself. He's not the Mishaleach. He's fought a separate person. And this is the whole union of Shlichus, how it combines these two concepts. On one hand, Shluchei Shel Adam K'maisai, and on the other hand, there is the person who is the Shliach, and this Shliach has to be in a bittul, totally dedicated to fulfill the will of the Mishaleach, but at the same time, he's a Metzias in his own. The Chlal, the Rebbe continues, the whole union of Briyas HaOlam is to Ani Nivreisi L'Shamish Eskoini. Person was created so that we can serve our master, to serve the Rebbeinu Shloim. And interesting, when we look into Chumash, and we look through the entire Bria, the entire creation of the world, when does the Torah use the expression that Vayara Lekim, that the Rebbe saw, that whatever he did was Tov Miyoid? The expression of Tov Miyoid, very good, that is used in the creation of Yom HaShishi, of Friday. Until Friday, there's no expression of Tov Miyoid. Why? Because Friday, that is when Adam HaRishon was created. What was Adam HaRishon's contribution to the world? What did Adam HaRishon accomplish? Adam HaRishon accomplished that he invited everyone who was created at that time, in other words, all the behemoths, v'chayis, he called them all, as the pasuk uses the expression, Boyu nishtachave v'nichra lifnei Hashem Elokeinu. Come, let us bow in front of the Rebishter. In other words, what did Adam HaRishon accomplish? He introduced the concept of being in a bittul to the Rebishter. This was something which Adam HaRishon introduced. Furthermore, the entire 6 days of Bria, the Rebishter was creating Yesh Me Ayin. From Ayin, from Gornish, the Rebishter created Yesh, he created a Metzias. What did Adam HaRishon accomplish? Adam HaRishon accomplished that from Yesh, from a Metzias, he made Ayin, he made Bittul. In other words, everyone that was created, he brought them up to a level of Ayin that they should be in a Bittul to the Rebishter. The concept of Bayu v'nishtachad v'nichra litnei Hashem Elokeinu, this is something which was introduced to Adam HaRishon. Rebbe continues, just like the Rebbe explains in Tanya, that every day, constantly, b'chol yoyim or b'chol rega, the world is renewed. Machadish b'tuva b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh v'reishes, as the Alter Rebbe explains in the second part of Tanya, Shara Yichud v'Emunah, the Alter Rebbe explains at length how the world constantly has to come on to the koyach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that the Rebbe should constantly give life into the world so that the world exists. Yesh me'ayin. The same way, it is constantly demanded from us to do in the Avodah, same Avodah of Adam HaRishon, that from this Yesh, which the Rebishter created, see that this Yesh becomes an Ayin in the sense of Bittul, realizing, Boy, Nishtacha, V'v'nicho, Lifnei Hashem Elokeinu. It says, this tafkid, this responsibility of Ani Nevreisi L'Shamesh Eskoini is given to each and every one of us. Everybody has this responsibility of serving the Rebishter. That our whole goal of creation is l'shamesh eskoini, to serve our master. However, hashgacha pratis has led to it that this is yet more bigilui, it's yet more visible in those individuals who have been chosen that they are to be shluchim. And what is the avodah v'shliach? The avodah v'shliach is this, that he's tied with nesida. They are shluchim from the Rebbe. And the responsibility of a shliach is that he should instill this and relate this message of Ani Nevreisi L'Shamesh Eskoini to every person that he comes into contact with. Especially now the Rebbe says that this is a kinus. We're here at a convention of shluchim from all over the world. So this definitely will give strength to each one of the shluchim, that they will come back to their respective places. And they will say that they participated in a kinus and a convention that had participants from all over the world. This will definitely help them, that they will be yet more successful in reaching out to more Yidden in a more effective way to bring this message of Ani Nevreisi L'Shamesh Eskoini, I was created to serve my master, to bring this to each and every Yid. Here the Rebbe says that he has a suggestion to suggest regarding the convention, regarding the Shluchim convention which is taking place, that it would be an appropriate idea that towards the end of the convention, after all the resolutions are already accepted, that all the Shluchim should go out to the Tzion, to the oil of the Frierdiker Rebbe, and they should all together sign on a pan, on a pidyon, at the which will be read at the yoel. One of the people, one of the shluchim, should read the pidyon, and then the pidyon should be left at the yoel. And the Rebbe says that there are various customs. There's some that have a minig that when the pidyon is put on the yoel, they just leave it there at the yoel. There are others that have a minig that the pidyon, a pan, is torn up into pieces and it's left at the yoel. These are various minhagim. The Rebbe says definitely every minig has its source. But regardless, this is what he suggests that would be extremely appropriate for each one of the shluchim to participate towards the end of the convention to go out to the yoel. The Rebbe again concluded that this should, all their resolutions and all the hachlotas which will be accepted should lead to be mezares, to hasten the Geula Shlema, and bechlal the inyan of Geula is also an inyan of Shliches, because this will reveal the Beis HaMikdash, how every Yid has a shayches to the Kodesh HaKadoshim of the Beis HaMikdash, and which is called the area of Yechida. We know within every neshama there are 5 levels: Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida. And there's, just like there's a Yechida in neshama, there's the same thing, there's a Yechida in place. It is in man, and we have it in Mokoim, and we have it in person. In Mokoim it is the area of the Beis HaMikdash. So the Mela, this will lead that the Yechida of every neshama will be revealed. And when the Yechida of every neshama is revealed, this prepares everybody, that everybody is ready for the Geula Shlema, so that we can come to the site of Yechida Leyachtach, which this is the area of the Beis HaMikdash. Then the Rebbe continued, second Sicha, Bechlal we know, Istakel be'eraise ubara alma. Zohar tells us that the Rebbe looked into Torah, and that is how created the world. Famous medrash that the Torah is a blueprint for the Rebbe when the Rebbe created the world. Same thing is when a Yid who is in this world and he's in doubt, he's in question what to do. So there's an expression from the Frierdiker Rebbe that when a Yid wants to know what to do, he should always refer to the Shulchan Aruch. Torah is at all times a guide for a Yid. Torah is called Torah's Chayim. It's a Torah which guides our life. Kihem Chayenu v'Oirech Yameinu. It guides our lives. And therefore we can always find a hirah. That is why Torah is from the word hirah, a lesson. We can find for any type of situation, we can always find guidance in Torah. And again, Rabbi mentions here, we have how there is avodas haprat and there is avodas haklal. There is the general, the avodah of Yidden, and then there is the avodah of each and every Yid separately. And every prat relates to the klal, because every member of Klal Yisrael, every member of Klal Yisrael, every prat is part of the klal. And when we're talking about tefillah, we know tefillah has a very obvious shaychus to Eretz Yisrael. Why? Because whenever we daven and wherever we daven, Shulchan Aruch tells us that we always have to face Eretz Yisrael and Yerushalayim in Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael we have to face Yerushalayim. Mela, this brings out this constant shaychus which we all have to Eretz Yisrael. The Rebbe says, we'll talk about something which happened recently in Eretz Yisrael, and that is the inyan of elections, which has taken place this week in Eretz Yisrael, which had the participation of hundreds and thousands of Yidden. We're not going to get involved at this point whether the Bechlal elections are important or whom to vote for. All these inyanim we're not getting involved in. But Bechlal, something was seen in the most recent election, something which should not have been that way. And that is the unusual amount of machlokes and dispute which was going on amongst Yidden. And when we're talking about Yidden, we're talking about Yidden Shomrei Torah mitzvahs. Naturally, we know that Chazal tell us, Ein dayeseim shavos, people's minds are not the same, and everybody has a different approach to an inyan. True. But at the same time, when everybody has a different approach, but usually it leads to the same maskana, it leads to the same result. As Chassidus explains, the whole inyan of Bina, that an inyan could be understood, but at various angles. There could be various svaras on a specific inyan. However, it will lead to the same maskana, it will lead to the same outcome. Unfortunately, here it led to Yad Ish al Riyayu. Not only was there Ein Deyesayim Shabbos, that their minds were their approaches and their ways of thinking was different, but it led to a situation of Yad Ish al Riyayu, which means simply a hand of one over another. And this is something which is naturally undesirable, especially when we're talking about Yidden, who are Yidden Shemrei Torah and Mitzvahs, and we're putting a Yid on his chazakeh. A Yid who's a Shemrei Torah Mitzvahs, definitely this is the type of attitude which is not the desirable one. Rabbi says, therefore, in order to rectify this, being that we are right now, before putting together the new government, the best advice would be, Rabbi says, that if these people were in a terrible dispute amongst each other until now, and could not have sat at one table, and definitely were not able to sit at one side of the table, if now they would begin to negotiate, and everybody naturally wants, we know that everybody is anxious to be ministers in the government, and this is how every party has their desire to do that. Everybody wants to be represented with more ministers, this is how the system works, that every party who's part of the government is also given ministerial posts, ministerial appointments, cabinets, various cabinets in the government. So Rabbi says, the best advice would be that these people who until now were completely in different opinions one with another should gather together, and what should be the first approach? To strengthen inyanim which everyone in the past has agreed on that this is the proper inyan. In other words, let us not look for new issues. Let us stick to old issues which everyone agrees that these issues have to be rectified. And therefore, once we would all agree on these old issues, which actually all of us, all the parties involved, agree that these issues have to be corrected and have to be rectified, this will ultimately lead that they will also be able to get together at one table and drink a cup of tea together. Memela, they will be able to ultimately get involved and discuss inyanim which until now they have had different opinions, one from another. They will be united and they will be able to discuss these inyanim as well. As a suggestion, the Rebbe says, there are two inyanim which are law in Israel, and both of these inyanim are extremely neglected and not adhered to. And anybody can look it up, and it's law, it was passed by everyone and agreed by everyone, and it is recorded as law, and that is regarding the Chayei Sarah, in other words, the law of abortion, which is prohibited in Eretz Yisrael, and also the law of the Tuchei Mesim, which is the law of autopsies, which both of these inyanim are prohibited in Eretz Yisrael. And when it is permitted only under special conditions. Has to have an authorization of several doctors, otherwise it is totally prohibited. And nonetheless, both of these inyanim, both of these areas are totally neglected in Eretz Yisrael. Totally neglected. Rabbi says there are thousands upon thousands of abortions that are practiced each and every year. And the same thing regarding the Tuchei Mesim, regarding autopsies. Therefore, the Rebbe says it would be extremely appropriate when all parties involved will join each other, and what they will demand will be that these inyanim, which is already recognized law from the past, that these inyanim should be rectified, and these inyanim should be corrected. This is something which everybody agrees on. In other words, there's no difference of opinion amongst the parties that these inyanim have to be recognized. Obviously, the Rebbe is referring to the religious parties, that these inyanim have to be corrected, and therefore, once they will be together and be united, demanding on these inyanim, which everybody has an equal interest in them, and this is already laws which were already passed and was accepted by all that this is how it has to be, this will definitely lead to it that ultimately they will be able to join in on other inyanim as well. Rabbi says, so there are those that are going to claim, where does he have the breitkeit to discuss such an inyan and demand something like that at a time that he is here, he is not in Eretz Yisrael. And we know the Chazal say it, there's an expression, Chazal, ein lo ledayin elo ma she'ein of royos, that a judge can judge on what he sees before him. Somebody who's in a different country, how can he come up with suggestions and advices and say what should be done in Eretz Yisrael? So first of all, the Rebbe says we're talking about an inyan which is negeya l'poyel, and it's something which it's negeya. It's negeya, so therefore it's negeya l'maisa, so therefore he cannot hold himself back from suggesting it. Furthermore, the Rebbe says, being that everything is bashgacha pratis, and this inyan is discussed at a time of a convention when there are shluchim here from all parts of the world. So actually we have here a representation from the entire world, and all these shluchim, the Rebbe says, have given him a yipu koyach, they have given him the authority to speak in their behalf. And Mela, so what he's talking and what he's demanding is he's really demanding in behalf of the ganze Welt, of the entire world. It was a few times here in the Sikha that the Rebbe used the expression that it is definitely not a time of aschalta de gula. There are those that claim that the entire union of the state of Israel is an union, that this is already the first steps of Geula. It is definitely not so. But the fact that there are a large number of Yidden, Kinei Nahara, that are living together in Eretz Yisrael, so definitely it has to be that they have to have a government, there has to be a system set up regarding the rules governing them, regarding their entire country. But no way does this mean that it's an inyan of aschalta de Geula. We should not interpret it. It is definitely not aschalta de Geula. We should not interpret it that it is the beginning of Geula. It is far from it yet. We are still in Golis, but at the same time, Yidden are living in Eretz Yisrael, and things have to be run properly there. Memela, these are the suggestions and the request which the Rebbe asked, that let the parties join together to prepare and demand that these two inyanim should be rectified, and this will lead that other inyanim which they will want to introduce, they will also be able to unite amongst themselves, to create a feeling of achdus amongst themselves. The Rebbe stressed several times the expression, there's a touch from the Alter Rebbe, we say in davening, Bocheinu avinu kulanu ke'echad. We ask Rabbeinu Shalom, give us bracha, all of us together. So the Alter Rebbe teaches, Bocheinu avinu, when are Yidden especially worthy of a bracha from the Rebishter, when we are in a madrega of kulanu ke'echad. When there is achdus amongst us, that is when the Yidden are a special keli to accept the birchas Hashem. So Mamela, achdus is extremely vital and extremely important. But continued, this fact that they will discuss amongst themselves in Yonim which are from the past and in Yonim which are agreed by everybody, were already taken for granted previously, this will lead to it that they will also be able to join in together and demand and work out for additional Inyanim, for other Inyanim as well. Rabbi continued that in this week's Sedre in Parshas Chayei Sarah we find three major Inyanim. The inyan of Kibush Ha'aretz, the beginning of the conquering of Eretz Yisrael, really began in Parshas Chayei Sarah. Because when Avraham Avinu acquired the Ma'aras HaMachpelah, and he paid the full price for it, and he paid it in Arba Meya Shekel Oiver L'Asoicher, it's a matbeya currency which has a value all over. This was the initial step of Avraham Avinu conquering Eretz Yisrael, which later became the inheritance of Avraham's children, which later became the nachla of each and every Yid. Also, we have in this week's Sedra the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, which here the fulfillment of the Arbe Esaracha, that the Rebishter has promised Avraham Avinu that he will multiply his children, he will give bracha into his children. This fulfillment, this bracha is being fulfilled through the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka. These inyanim come as a continuation to another inyan which comes before that. And that is the inyan of the Akedah. What is the inyan of the Akedah? The Akedah is Mesiras Nefesh. In other words, when can these inyanim be fulfilled properly? Side the inyan that would lead to Kibush Haaretz, conquering Eretz Yisrael, until not only Will it be like we had in the past? We had a land of 7 nations, but when Mashiach will come, it'll be a Eretz Asara Amamin. It'll be the land of, the Rebbe will give us the land of 10 nations. And also the Inyan of the Yichud of Yitzchak and Rivka, the Yichud and Yitzchak and Rivka, which this led to the Chayei Sarah, which this led to the birth of Klal Yisrael. Each and every neshama which is being born is a chelek eleka mimal mamish, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya. The Rebbe kept on stressing what is the inyan of mamish. Mamish is the expression. There are 2 types in mamish. Number 1, mamish we use as an expression when we want to feel something which could be felt, something which is tangible. That's when we use the expression mamish. The same thing, it's mamish felt that every neshama is a chelek eleka mimal, and also that it is. Sizazoi, mamish, this is how it is. That each and every neshama is a part of godliness. And when can there be a success in fulfilling these inyanim? That is when this comes with the introduction of Mesiras Nefesh. Here the Rebbe added on that the Frierdiker Rebbe expressed his opinion olden times when the Haskalah movement was spreading. One of their concepts was that when children are being brought up in Cheder, not to tell children stories about Mesiras Nefesh. Because a child can only be related, we relate to a child only stories that a child can understand in his seichel. But when you start telling a child in Yonim of Mesiras Nefesh, this is something which a child cannot understand it, so why confuse the mind of a child? There's a very famous Reshima, a famous writing of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Frierdiker Rebbe, it's printed, I think, in the biography of the Alter Rebbe, the biography of Tildas Admur Azoken. It's a whole story about a Malamed, somebody who was a teacher of children. And this Malamed, I don't remember it in its detail, but this is what the Rebbe was referring to. This Malamed came to the Alter Rebbe. And this Malamed was really, already at that time, had a shaykhus. This was when the Haskalah movement first began. And this Malamed was already affected with Haskalah. So the Alter Rebbe asked him, how does he teach a certain pasuk to children? The pasuk, if I remember correctly, it's the pasuk Vayechad Yitzchak Charoda Gdoila. That Yitzchak shivered, gave a starken zitter, that is after, when Esav came in, after Yaakov got the brachas from him. So the Alter Rebbe asked him, when you teach children, when you're learning with children, how do you teach up this pasuk? So he told him that he teaches it in the Pashut sense. There's Rashi brings 2 perushim on them, and one of them is fighting with a medrash. The medrash has to do with Gehenim and all that. So the Alter Rebbe asks him, why don't you also mention to the children the other perush? So he says, well, he doesn't feel that it's proper to take the minds of youngsters and confuse them with such type of inyan. So this is when the Alter Rebbe realized that this person has a shaykhus to Haskalah, that is, he's not a troop, he's not a Yerushalayim in the true sense, because Adarabbe, mitzad Yerushalayim, on the contrary, children, mitzad the fact that a child is young, and a child does not have a developed seichel yet, so a child is even yet more shaykhus to understand the whole inyan of Mesiras Nefesh. And on the contrary, there is no inyan in being ashamed and holding this back from children. Adarabbe, this has to be told and mentioned to children and said to children. And back in Pshuta Shel Mikra, we also find how the inyan of the birth of Rivka has a shaykhus to the Akedah. Because according to Pshuta Shel Mikra, and according to the opinion of most Mefoshim, Rivka was 3 years old when she married Yitzchak. Which means, when did this happen? It happened 3 years after the Akedah. And that is why when we look into Chumash, after the Akedah, at the end of Parshas Vayera, after the Akedah, that is when it is told about the birth of Rivka, because that is when Rivka was born. So again, we see an Abvi Shaykhus between the Akedah and Rivka. Even there's another opinion that claims that Rivka was not 3 years old, but Rivka was at the age of 13 when she married Yitzchak. But nonetheless, when we look into Chumash, we see that it is still after the Akedah that the Torah talks about the birth of Yitzchak. It may have happened earlier, but this is when the Torah discusses it. So again, we see that the whole inyan of the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka and their success and building Am Yisrael, their success when can it be successful? When it is bound with the concept of the Akedah. What is the concept of the Akedah? Mesiras Nefesh. When it's bound with the concept of Mesiras Nefesh, that is when it is successful. Here the Rebbe continued, we are entering this week Pashas Toldos. Pashas Toldus discusses Eila Toldus Yitzchak, Yitzchak ben Avram, Avram Heiladus Yitzchak. But to talk about Yitzchak now at the time of Mincha, which was already right before Mincha, that's extremely appropriate, because Chazal tell us that Yitzchak was the one that was Mesaken Tfilas Mincha. Yitzchak was the one that arranged Mincha. So regarding Yitzchak and Avram, here we find in Chazal that Chazal tell us, Pasuk says that this is the Toldus Yitzchak, Yitzchak ben Avram, and then it repeated again, Avram Heiladus Yitzchak. So Chazal tell us that the Rebishter made Yitzchak and Avram really looked extremely alike one to another. And the Rebishter their faces were extremely alike, until to such an extent that the Rebishter had to make a siman that people should be able to identify who is Yitzchak and who is Avram. The Rebbe brought out what is the difference between Yitzchak and Avram. When we're talking here about Yitzchak and Avram, Yitzchak was the son and Avram was the father. And the Rebishter wanted it should be noticeable a difference between Yitzchak and Avram. What says? There's an avodah which is demanded from a younger person, and there are certain yonim and avodah which are demanded from an older person. As the Mishnah tells us in Pirkei Avos, what is the union of ben esrim and what is the union of ben shloishim? That is when a person reaches to a level of strength, to a level of lirdoif. That is one derech and avodah. And there is other in yonim and avodah. There are other milas which are in zikna, which are in age. The Mela, this is what the Torah is stressing here, that there's a Maila in Yitzchak and there's a Maila in Avram. Each one of them has their plus, has their advantage. But ended the Farbrengen by mentioning that being that, again, this is a convention of Shluchim, so it's also extremely appropriate. It's also extremely appropriate to mention about the Inyan of Binyanim, about building, which the Rebbe has been talking about recently, that it is a time, it's a proper, opportune time to build houses of Torah, houses of Tefillah, houses of Tzedakah. And therefore, it's extremely appropriate, as far as the Shluchim, they should all be involved in adding on to the existing houses of Torah, Tefillah, Tzedakah, which they have. And if it's at this moment they cannot build it yet, and what they will be doing is renting additional quarters or renting additional space, at least that the rental should be done in such a way that ultimately they should be able to acquire it, that it should become their own. As the Rebbe has explained, referred to what he explained in the previous Farbrengen, is that Tachlis Hashleimus is when the property is really owned by one. This is when he really has fullest balabatischkeit to do whatever he wants on a property. That is when one owns the property. So when it is rented with the option that later it could be bought, later it could be acquired, even though at this point they cannot buy it yet, or they cannot build on it yet, but at least what they're doing is renting it, they're still expanding their quarters, this is also advisable. So we concluded the Farbrengen, again stressing the mila of youngsters, Hevel She'im Behem Chet. Hevel She'im Behem Chet, the great accomplishments that can be achieved by children while learning Torah. That's a Torah which comes out of a breath that has no sin. And this naturally applies side to the learning of little boys and side to the learning of little girls. What we brought out in the last words of the Farbrengen, how the Inyan of Torah and mitzvahs is the same concept as Guf and Neshama. Torah is the Neshama and mitzvahs is the Guf. Why? Because when we fulfill the mitzvahs are always fulfilled through Gashmias. And what gives us the chayis? Where do we get the life and the inspiration to be able to fulfill the mitzvahs? And the guidance how to fulfill the mitzvahs, this we get from the neshama, which in this case is compared to Torah. Agutavach. Explain that the rift between all these people, between all the parties involved, is such a big one. That's how he explained it. It says, it's Yad Ish al Reyeyu. Ain't they saying Shabbos? People should have different opinions. That's something normal, something routine. That's how the Rebbe created the Welt as he gave us. But at the same time, even though people have different opinions, usually the maskona, the outcome is always the same. Here there was such bitter machlokes going on in the recent election that the only way to be able to unite, obviously we're talking about the religious parties, that the only way that they will be able to be united and come and demand things together is, let's not look for new issues. Let's talk about old issues which everyone has agreed on, and everyone has agreed upon that they have to be corrected, and this is already accepted law in Eretz Yisrael, side union of abortion or side union of the Tuche Mason. Nobody could say that they're coming to introduce something new. Because the entire government is afraid, the entire country, all the papers were writing that it's going to become a religious government now. All the papers the last few days were writing that with a strong uprising of religious representatives, now who knows what they'll accomplish. The Rebbe says, let's not look for new things. We will only ask that whatever has already been accepted law should be enforced. And according to accepted law, abortions cannot be performed in Eretz Yisrael unless under certain conditions, and has to have an authorization of more than one doctor, of 2 doctors, of 3 doctors. And he says thousands upon thousands of abortions are being committed every year in Eretz Yisrael. And the same regarding to Chayei Sarah. Autopsies are done without freely. The Rebbe says, let's hope that by uniting with this inyan, which is something which is agreed by you all and was already fought out previously and accepted law previously, this will lead to it that they'll be able to sit by one table, or by one side of the table, and be able to drink a cup of tea together, and then they'll be able to get into other inyanim as well. You see, it's moiradik. I mean, what's happening is the Rebbe is not asking for me Yehudi now, as long as everybody things should start going smoothly.
That's right. Because we create too much animosity.
That's right. The Rebbe feels that the time is not ripe enough yet to push me.
It's a Vadachara.
Right.
How to act with people that are against you.
Yeah.
And that he pushes his own feelings above.
And he's pushing for things which they have been screaming about in the past. These were not issues which the Rebbe has been demanding in the past. The others have been screaming about these issues.
So then now the Misnagdim will have to go for abortions.
You
You put the Mamzerim into a point where they're going to have to support abortions and autopsies, and they'll do it. They'll do it. The Misnagit and the Kli Geruch together support abortions.